Miss Soledad O'Brien.
I don't think I've ever seen you in this jacket.
Yeah, it happens every now and then. I usually wear a robe, you know. But.
Hi, guys.
Were you kidding about that train?
No, I had a terrible Amtrak day yesterday.
Are you being serious?
Yes, I was doing live shots.
The
whole Northeast corridor on Amtrak died from power failure yesterday while I was on the train. So I was calling from the train, doing live shots, and then on the way back we had someone jump. So that shut down the train too. So I spent about 24 hours, many of them on Amtrak yesterday, traveling.
You travel on Amtrak often?
I take Amtrak all the time out of New York because it's so easy. You know, it's usually. It's especially because we've had really bad weather in New York lately. Thanks. And so it's much easier in inclement weather to just either walk down or hop on the train and take the train in. But yesterday was a little bit of a cursed day.
Stand by. All right.
I'm not usually on this side. I'm kind of like a little anxious.
Oh, how I've been waiting.
Yeah. I deny everything. I want my attorney.
Oh, yeah.
Bring it on.
I did this interview with this guy one time. We were sitting around just kind of joking around or whatever. It's called a hot seat. And then the camera's turned on. He's like, so Irvin Mayfield. He just told all these like hard questions. I'm like, dude, I was like kind of sweating after that.
That's how we roll.
Yeah, it's going. Don't worry, I know you're going to be good. It's going to be.
Let's make stuff up if I have to.
Did you hear my Twitter, Facebook?
Just now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I actually thought there's several things that you said that I would steal.
Really?
I like that. Yeah. Most powerful statement of the day, class.
If you steal it, you know, I'm gonna
I will
sue
credit you. No worries.
Okay. All right.
On Twitter, which means nothing.
Well, once again, let's welcome our guest, Soledad O'Brien.
Thank you.
I just want to, you guys, if you haven't been hiding in a cave anywhere underneath a rock, you're very familiar with who Soledad O'Brien, but I do want to take a moment to kind of just talk about some of her accolades. Obviously, she's a Harvard graduate, but I just want to read some of the things that she's accomplished. She was a part of the coverage team that earned a George Foster Peabody Award for Katrina coverage and a DuPont Award for the coverage of the tsunami. She has numerous other awards like the Gracie Allen Award in 2007. She also was honored by the NAACP with its President's Award for humanitarian efforts in journalistic excellence. In 2008, she was the first recipient of the Soledad O'Brien Freedom's Voice Award.
If you name it after yourself, you can win. That's always a good strategy.
From Morehouse School of Medicine. And she was also the first recipient of the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health's Guter Moat Humanitarian Award. That's a long one.
We just need a shorter title.
For Hurricane Katrina and also tsunami coverage. And she received the 2009 Medallion of Excellence for Leadership and Community Service from the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute.
And I was named Journalist of the Year this year by NABJ.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
She's also a member of the National Association of Black Journalists and the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. I want to figure that one out. And she's our guest today. So, Soledad, how you doing today?
I'm very well.
Let's talk about currently what you're doing at CNN right now and what brings you to the city of New Orleans.
They created, back in November, a unit for me called In America, which was a spin-off sort of a couple of documentaries that we had done really successfully. We did Black in America, and then Black in America 2, and Latino in America. And then sort of we had backed into, wow, In America is kind of a good platform. Why don't we create that, move the bulk of it to New York? Because most of my producers were working out of the CNN headquarters in Atlanta. And it was a really, the sort of the theme we operate under was, focusing on undertold, undercovered stories, which to me sounded like, I'll be working forever. This is great. That's everything. I mean, everything. Unless there's 100 reporters covering it, right. Which is the kind of stuff that I wouldn't necessarily do. We'd and even then, you'd search for the untold thread of that story. So I'm back in town. We just finished airing our Katrina documentary, which was called New Orleans Rising. It aired over the weekend, and I'm back because Anderson's documentary will air on Friday night, and so I'll be part of his show's coverage with a couple of stories that we're doing focusing on Katrina then and now, also for the morning show. And then a look at a place in Mississippi called Pearlington. And those are two community, you know, New Orleans as a whole, and then Pearlington, Mississippi, two places that I spent a lot of time during Katrina, right after Katrina, and then over the years past, really following up on some of the people that we met and sort of marking their progress along the way. So in the big picture, I'm doing this In America unit, and in the smaller picture in New Orleans, because, you know, I try to come in every Wednesday so I can catch a show. But, but also our Katrina anniversary coverage.
Let's discuss national disasters, international disasters. How much is now available because of the internet, around-the-clock media, and the effect that you think that has had on society in terms of socially. What's the effect that you think, has it had any mental effects of, in terms of wellness? There's always an ongoing debate about how much should we know. Should we know that in this little small town somewhere a fire burned down all of this, and also know that this thing may have happened in a place somewhere else in the world, which may be a very small incident as far as the global world is concerned. So what are your thoughts on that as far as the national media? Should it be available to folks?
We definitely have shrunk the globe. And for example, I'll use the earthquake in Haiti as a good example. And I think we don't tend to do the one, or the work that I do is not the sort of one small story that somewhere that doesn't have a lot of relevance. I tend to get to only cover some of the bigger stories, which is good for a number of reasons. One, I think the stories have more nuance. You're there for a long time. You can kind of plant yourself. But also, I have 4 kids, and if I travel all the time for every little story across the globe, I could not do my job. So I tend to go on one of those big trips, you know, once or twice a year at the most, and then stay for, you know, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and then keep coming back. So logistically, that helps me. And so the globe has definitely, you know, gotten smaller. When something happens in Haiti, everyone expects to see it on CNN. They really, I mean, they're just expecting, like, well, when are we going to see the pictures? And so we now have the technology that's the size of a laptop called a BGAN that we can literally, it's a satellite, and you can just set up a little dish. It's all portable. I can carry it in my carry-on luggage, and you set it up like your laptop, and you dial it in, and you set up your satellite dish, and you can be live. Wow. Immediately from a corner. And so now the quality of the picture, I'm sure you've seen it on CNN and other places, it's sort of staggers, it sort of shifts back and forth. You can't move a lot when you're doing a BGAN live shot. But if you're talking about something has just happened, what does it look like? So get someone on the ground to tell us, that's going to be your first pictures, and we can do that really easily and really well. Plus, on the other side, you know, a lot of the Haitians were sending us video clips. Anybody who was shooting with their cell phone or shoot, you know, that's technology that Haiti is one of the poorest nations in the world, and yet people were immediately sending us clips from their cell phones of the disaster, what was around them, and being available to do live shots for us. So in a way, the globe has gotten much smaller. We can just get information much faster. I wouldn't think of it in terms of wellness. I think of it in terms of connectedness. I think that there's a sense when a globe gets smaller that we have a relationship with the people in New Orleans in a disaster, the people in Nashville in a disaster, the people in Haiti in a disaster, the people in Thailand in a disaster. Because we can see the pictures, because you're hearing their voices, it's not like, oh, foreign land, we've managed to get one of our people in. It really is more like a mad dash. Anderson almost always goes in first. In fact, I was negotiating with Wyclef Jean to go in with him into Haiti because he's basically God in Haiti. And so if you can get in with Wyclef, you know, you can go through customs, all that stuff is easy to do. And he's like, listen, I got to go do Anderson's show, but as soon as I do that, we'll go meet you at the airport, we'll go. On Anderson's show, he leans over to Anderson and says, well, why don't I take you in, Anderson? I'm like, thanks, Wyclef. What about me? And so Anderson went in and got on the ground, and we actually ended up going in a couple of days later with the president of the Dominican Republic, just dropped us in the backyard of his embassy. And so we choppered in, so we were able to kind of get in pretty easily that way. And then the first step is Anderson's team goes and finds housing, number one, and finds a place, right? We found a hotel that hadn't been knocked down and set up our giant satellite dish and start cabling for a control room. And Anderson runs around and we start shooting. So I think it's the immediacy now. We were on right away. We were on right away with bad pictures, and then the next morning he was on live.
What do you think the challenge is with, are there any challenges with how immediate things are now?
You know, I guess I always err on the side of I'd rather know. And it's sort of how I treat my kids too. I think there are a lot of parents who rather not tell their, and I'm like, I'm just going to give them the information and then sort of guide them in a way so that they know they can always come back to me if they have a question. So I guess I would rather know. I'd like to be on the ground, and it's one of the reasons I like to travel. It's like, because I'd like to go and tell that story. And I'd like to go and frame it the way that I am seeing it unfold, because I think I'm good at that. And I'd like to go and be that person who's the early on eyes and ears and voice of the story. So really, in almost everything I do, I'm a big believer in, I tell people and say, this is what I know, this is what I don't know. Here, any questions? How do you want to follow up for pretty much everything? So that everybody's kind of, I don't think that I don't like censoring things. I don't like picking and choosing. It used to irk me on the evening news years and years ago. And when I was a kid, we used to watch the McNeil-Lehrer News Hour, my dad's favorite show. You know, and there was always a sense of like, we've picked the most important stories that you need to know. And even when I was starting in the news, you know, there were the women's stories where education and healthcare and all these, you know, social issues. And I'm like, those are the most important, those are the things that create the fabric of society. Why is education, you know, the girl's story with the girl reporter gets to do that, but politics is the guy's story and the guy, you know, the credibility and the clout. I just thought that was crap. So to me, I'd rather just be able to say, these are the things we know. I try to pick by interesting characters. You know, that's what makes the cut. If someone is great story, but not a particularly interesting interview or can't get their words out, or, you know, that's sort of how I choose. Not by, yeah, I just don't feel comfortable people knowing that. Or, oh, you know, this story kind of goes against all the things we believe. We better not show that one. This thing is a contradiction. Better not do that. You know, that's ridiculous and unfair. I don't want to be the Walter Cronkite, you know, and that's how it is. You know, no, it's not. That's not how it is. It never ends. You know, that's the beauty of information today. Is there's always a step more and a step further. I always thought it was kind of patronizing and condescending, frankly. You know, that I have picked in the next 30 minutes, I'm going to tell you everything important that your little brains need to know and no more. That's just stupid and offensive.
When you're on the ground, Haiti, New Orleans, tsunami, and this was a common question, I know, to citizens in New Orleans for Katrina. When you're the news media and there are, you know, thousands of people at the convention center, and you're able to get here and cover the story and get it back, what is the challenge with that? If there's, you know, what does that feel like? I guess that's the first question I want to ask. My second question would be, a lot of folks wonder if there are so many people who need so much, but the news media is there to cover. Is there another role the news media can play inside of assisting people out of harm's way?
And I think that those two questions are connected, because I think when you're saying how does that feel, it's sort of like you go in with a bottle of nice cold water from your cooler into the convention center, right? I mean, like, how does that feel to, I will say this, my daughter, right before I went to cover Katrina, said, so what are you going to do? I hear they have no water. And I said, well, you know, she goes, well, are you going to have water? I said, yeah, we're going to bring, you know, CNN will provide water. So what happens if people want your water? So if people want my water, well, you know, I'll share my water. You know, I'm like, an opportunity to teach about sharing. Why, we'll share the water, you sometimes obnoxious 6-year-old who should be sharing more with her brothers. And we went back and forth. But the truth is, no one ever asked me. Really, I mean, in Haiti, people asked all the time for water, but no one in Katrina, never. Not once. I was not asked. Sometimes some of the rescue workers would ask if you had a power bar or something, but never, there was not somebody who we were rescuing. People wanted to be helped, and they wanted information. They wanted to use phones. I mean, I gave people my cell phone all the time, but I never was in a position of, I have one bottle of water left, what do I do? Just never came down to that. But we do travel with literally crates and crates of water so that, you know, if we have to hand it out, you know, we always do. I guess I have found that people understand the role of the media in a disaster, and I think especially CNN, it's one of the big upsides of working for CNN, is that, I'll take a little detour on this answer.
Okay.
When I was covering the inauguration, I left myself 3 hours to go the 8 blocks from the hotel to our live shot location. And I get out at 7 o'clock in the morning, and there are 5,000 people between me and where I need to be. And I was like, oh my God, I thought I left so much time. And literally, I'd say, I am so sorry, but I'm going to have to cut through this line. You know, giant people waiting at gates to get into the next gate, to get to the next gate, because they had cordoned the whole thing off. And people would say, oh my God, it's Soledad from CNN. She needs to be on TV. Everybody make a path. And then literally, I cut my way through 8 blocks to get to the front. And I had a hairdresser and a producer with him. We had to hold hands. I'd be like, okay, thank you. And someone would complain. I'd take their picture and I'd blog about Mary Jane Doe says she's cold and she wants to know if why she has a ticket. So I think at CNN, we have a reputation for, you know, what they're going to do is bring this information out to a wider public. And that kind of answers, I think, the second part of the question, which is, I don't think I have another role other than I provide information. And I think the minute you start going in with a different agenda, you don't do your job as a journalist well.
Well, you brought me to my next question about that. Does that get to be challenging?
It can. It can. During the tsunami, Thailand is 12 hours ahead of New York, so I used to go to bed at 10 o'clock at night, right after the morning show that I was anchoring was over. And I would lie in bed and I would just cry and cry and cry, because you would just see the most horrific things all day. Just dead babies washing up, and they were so little they could put them on trays in the Buddhist temples where they were storing the body. I mean, just horrific, horrific things. And so, it just was, you sort of don't have an outlet for that. You just, even, Katrina, you just see so much sorrow, so much loss, and it feels idiotic because it's not your loss, right? I'm going to go home to my house, which is standing just fine, and I'm going to go home to my children, who are all perfectly healthy and fine and have experienced nothing, but you feel like you've been knee-deep in this terrible sorrow. My husband and I, after Black in America aired, we started a charity, educational charity, which has a very awful name, the Soledad O'Brien Brad Raymond Family Foundation. We're like, that's a terrible name. but the goal was, and the reason we started this foundation, I met a young woman who was getting an HIV test as part of our story, 18 years old. I said, why are you getting an HIV test? And she said, well, I think my boyfriend probably isn't faithful, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I'm sure he's not. I mean, if you're telling me, and we've met 8 minutes ago, my guess is, my gut on this is he's cheating on you. And I said to her, why are you not in college? Did you graduate from high school? She said, yeah, she was pregnant, but she'd graduated from high school, which, having had 4 kids, I know that had to be really hard. And she says, well, my big problem, I said, did you do well in high school? Yeah, I was a very good student. I did really well. I said, well, why aren't you in school? And she said, I can't afford daycare for my son, who's 18 months. And so after the documentary aired, I called her up. And beautiful, smart, like totally sharp girl, except on this one issue. And I said, I'm going to make you a deal. I'm going to pay for your daycare. In exchange, you have to go to college. You're on the 4-year plan, so, and she's like, it's a deal. And now she's about to start her 3rd year. But to me, it seemed like that was something I could do in a small, tiny way. Her daycare is not expensive, and she wants to be social, and we talk all the time, and she comes to my kids' birthday parties. I'd say we check in a lot. We have a little bit of a mentor-mentee relationship. Just a great kid who just needed a little help, over the finish line or to get going. The minute I did that, she enrolled in college, and then she broke up with a boyfriend, because of course she did. Once you have something that's looming as your future, you say, well, I'm not going to be around some idiot who's clearly cheating on me. And it felt like I had made an impact by literally almost no money in her life, in her kid's life, and sort of a lot around her. And we do that now for a handful of kids. After Katrina, my girlfriend Kim, who called and said there's a little girl who's trying to get into Ursuline. Only kid in her class who didn't get a scholarship. And so we did a scholarship for this little girl who's going to be, I think she's going to be a junior or senior. I mean, just, we've tried to do these little tiny things.
So in your own way, is that how you keep the line?
I think it helps you keep your sanity, right? I think it feels like, okay, I can't help these literally 3,000 people who are here hoping to get food in Haiti to this, have come to this church, and they're in hysterics. But what I can do is help a couple of people.
3 questions. Haiti, New Orleans, tsunami. What is the untold story there?
The untold story in Haiti is that people are leaving their homes to move into tent cities, which is negative progress, obviously. Homes that weren't damaged at all by the earthquake, because the services have now gone to the tent cities. There's water in the tent city. The Red Cross is the tent city. There's medical care, right? So think of how completely screwed up it must be if you're going to leave your perfectly good home and move into a tent city, which is a completely horrific existence, because there's water there, because otherwise you've got to walk the 6 miles to get water. That's one. And the other part of that is, one of the orphanages where we were doing our story, the guy who runs the orphanage said, you know, a lot of these kids, when they first came, would hoard their food. I said, really? He said, yeah, you know, the average person in Haiti eats once every other day. Once every other day. Think of all the food we waste. Think of all the crap that we just eat and throw out. And I mean, me included. I scrape food into the garbage after my kids have decided that they thought they wanted mac and cheese, but now they don't want mac and cheese because it was touching the other, you know, the broccoli, whatever. One meal every other day. And at the orphanage, they were feeding these kids 3 meals a day, but the kids didn't believe it. So they'd get breakfast and they'd hang on to it. And they'd stash it, he said, all over the place. Wherever we go, there are, you know, food on plates, these little metal plates that they use. Amazing. In New Orleans, that's a good question. I guess what I'm really curious about, and I haven't gotten a good grip on it because I haven't really covered it, is from a distance, when I log on to NOLA.com, it seems like there's any conversation that's going on sort of devolves into a conversation about race. Like 2 comments later, somehow it's like, how did this become about race? And I'm just an outsider looking in, and I'm trying to understand that, because I think for me, as an outsider, the reputation of New Orleans was always a place where everybody lives happily, and you know, boy, this is a great example of different cultures living together and understanding and respecting and enjoying, you know, each other. And I see in NOLA.com kind of this clash and anger. And I don't know if a little bit of that is PTSD. I don't know if a little bit of that is just when you're just angry, you need to get that out in some capacity. Tsunami, that's really good. We don't even cover the tsunami anymore. So I don't even know what the story is. I'd be curious to know how Thailand has rebounded from a tourist perspective, because one of the weirdest things when I was covering the tsunami were bodies washing up at the beach and the German tourists like laying out their towels. I am fairly hardcore and I love the beach, but you could not pay me. I was like, oh no, this is just so wrong. And they'd say, no, we're here to support the economy.
Wow.
Like, good for you. I don't think I could do that, but because they're like teams of people grabbing corpses out of the water. Crazy. But I don't know how their economy, I don't know if that strategy worked, because what they really put out after the tsunami was, don't send us money, come visit. We need the economy, the tourism economy.
Let's go to national. You brought up race. Before we go back to race, because you've obviously covered a tremendous amount of material on race in America, I want to discuss politics.
Sure.
One of the ongoing themes, anytime we get on politics, in any discussion, of course it'll happen here when Mr. Carville and his wife become our guests for a course, a session here, will be Fox, CNN, you know. Is CNN a liberal TV station? Is Fox a conservative station?
I think Fox takes a point of view. And I say that, I don't watch a lot of Fox, but I do think on some of the stories that I've seen, they've definitely taken a really conservative perspective. That there's sort of, in some of the stories I've seen, no attempt to even try to tell both sides. At CNN, and I can only speak for the stuff that I do, I don't feel like I go in with an agenda. You know, I feel like my job is to ask questions. I like to think, I hate all politicians equally, and I am not a Democrat. So I dislike I think you almost have to dislike anybody whose job it is to keep campaigning for votes for the next thing. I mean, it's like inherently there's something wrong with that, I think. So I am not a fan of politicians at all. So I sort of like to grill all of them, and I really hate the ones who lie to me, regardless of what side of the aisle they're on. What I have found actually more problematic, and I think they do this more at Fox and at MSNBC than at CNN, is to have the pundits sort of tell their, the whole show is based on, let me tell the people who believe as I believe, because that's not how I watch news. I want to understand what's going on. So I actually prefer in an argument, when Mary Madeline and James Carville come, right? They'll both you have two smart people who are going to kind of go at it, and the moderator's job is to keep them honest. So when they throw out a fact, you say, yes, but that was only between such and such a date and such a date. Or, well, your point is right, except that everybody knows that that was overturned 3 years later. I mean, right, that's the moderator's job. But the goal is that at the end of that, you've learned more about a topic, regardless of where you started. It's actually what I like about being a journalist, is you get to pick these subjects, and abortion, and you get to talk to people on both sides who are thoughtful, interesting, passionate, not the crazies and the extremes on both sides, but the real, the people who are like, this is my position, it's a well thought out, intelligent position. And the other person says, he is completely wrong, and my position is also a well thought out, intelligent position. I'm interested in understanding the debate so that I can figure out where I want to be on that, sort of range of opinion. I really just don't want someone lecturing back to me, because I don't think you necessarily learn. That's for me as a viewer. So I think that they tend to do that more than we do.
This is a room of the next generation of leaders. What role?
Hurry, help!
What's the role, or what's the expectation? They watch you on the news, you lay out the stories, you've given kind of your perspective of how do you think a good debate should be positioned? What role do they play as the ones who are watching? How do they engage? What's their responsibility?
I think it's about asking tough questions. I think that really it's the same job as the moderator, which is we're doing a political series this year, and so I was talking to a guy who's a member of the Tea Party, kind of high up. It's a very loose hierarchy. Black guy, very rare to have black people who are members of the Tea Party. And then we also started talking about the Ground Zero Mosque, as it's called, in New York. And on one hand, he was arguing for the Tea Party, because I said, there are people who think the Tea Party is racist, blah, blah, blah. Well, how can you it's no question, every group has its fringe, every group has people who show up with placards and say crazy things. That doesn't represent the group. And I said, so I don't get why that doesn't apply to Islam. Because what you're saying, except for, and then he kind of, I think my job as the moderator, I don't live near Ground Zero. The mosque, I have zero opinion on whether the mosque should be built at all. I'm really interested in the bigger picture about what does it say about America and where are we as a country. But whether or not someone puts a mosque in a certain location that is not my neighborhood, I don't care. I just want to be I want to understand the debate. And so, Tea Party, same thing. I have no issues with the Tea Party. Yes, I go to the rallies because I'm interested to bring my kids, because often they happen on the weekends. I'm just interested in seeing what they're like. I have no dog in the fight. So I think a good debate is to push people where they're being completely contradictory. He's being completely contradictory on that issue. On one hand, he thinks fringe elements are damaging to the Tea Party, but they do not define the Tea Party. The Tea Party is this, it's solid, it's important, it's relevant, it's grassroots. And then, yeah, you're going to have your crazy fringe that's going to do stuff that's going to get the media attention, but does not define the Tea Party. But when you look at Islam and the mosque, because he believes that there's some elements, some Muslims who are, in his opinion, I'm going to try to phrase this correctly, the way he said it to me, who are trying to bring down America through Islam and take over America through Islam and impose Sharia law on Americans. And I said, well, is that everybody? No, there's an element. There's always that element. We got to be worried about it and wary of it. Okay, but that completely contradicts what you've just said about the other thing. So while I have no opinion on this, what I do have a problem with is complete hypocrisy on an issue. That's what I want to discuss. And so I think where people can be helpful, if you're the next generation of leaders, to really understand. I mean, he kept saying, this is really hollow ground. I'm like, there are sex clubs. I live downtown. I mean, with all due respect, it is hollow ground, obviously, for thousands of people who died there. But there's this painting of a picture that this area is, no one has put it, they're office buildings, and there are other mosques, and there are, you know, strip clubs. It's, you know, downtown. It's a part of New York. So what I don't like is erroneous painting of a story. Let's just be accurate. Let's not paint anything. Does that mean it should be built, shouldn't be built? I don't know. Not up for me to say. But I'm interested in making sure that the facts are accurate.
Let me give another question. I consider them the next leaders. Let's say they're in the middle of midterms. They have the radio on, perhaps the TV. They don't have a lot of time. They're watching whatever station they're watching. And typically, the arrangement of discourse that's going on about America or things right now is not what the utopia that you kind of described. So what should they?
I think that's my phone, so don't worry about it. So we'll just have to ignore it. I thought I shut it off. My apologies. You know, I guess I think that the next generation of leaders, the one strength that they can bring is to not be cynical and to not be pessimistic about our future. One of the great things about America that you see actually when immigrants come to this country, they're just like, oh, if I'm in America, I finally made it to America is the greatest whatever. My parents are both immigrants to this country. You talk to them, and my mother worked at Woolworths at a time in the 50s where she wasn't allowed to try on any clothes. Black people couldn't try the clothes on in the stores where they were working. And I would say, God, you know, weren't you mad? And how come you didn't march? And, you know, and she's like, oh, you know, I was so happy to be in America. She had just come out of Cuba. I was so happy to be in America. Like, how amazing. You know, you guys don't understand what it's like in Cuba where people have literally 2 dresses and they wash one and they wear the other one. You know, or in Haiti where people are creating these 10 cities and people are out there, you know, sweeping the streets. You know, there's a certain, often I think people call it resilience, but I think it's a resignation of like, people in Haiti don't expect it to be better. You know, it's not that it's like they're so strong. It's more like the country has never really served its people well. One of the things you saw in Katrina, in fact, someone was asking me the other day, compare Haiti and New Orleans. And I was like, except that there are a lot of black people, there's really no comparison. Because in New Orleans, that screaming you saw in front of the convention center was, I'm an American citizen. And isn't this the point where they cue the people to come in and rescue us? Like, where's the water bottles dropped that we're expecting? There's a sense of anger and hostility because we have expectations as Americans that something, you know, this is why we pay our taxes and this is why we vote and this is why, you know, we're citizens. And so I think that leaders, if you can keep an optimism, because it's just very easy to be, everyone knows, you have your angry, and I have a million of them, angry, hysterically funny, dark friend, right? And they can just help you spiral the drain about how bad everything is and how they're being screwed in some capacity. You know, and you realize at the end of that conversation, they have sucked all the life out of you, but they're funny and they're entertaining, and you know, I've literally spent my time cutting those people out of my life because what I found was they drag you down. They drag you down. They don't go and do. They don't go and help. We're doing Black in America 3, which looks at the black church, and I'm a very bad Catholic. I just don't go a whole heck of a lot, but I've gone to a lot of Baptist churches, and people talk a lot about faith and action, and I've really liked that phrase because I like the idea of if it's really so bad, then go fix it. Go fix it. You know, so someone's starving, then go feed them, and then go figure out how to feed them. And a lot of people, you know, Baptists certainly frame that around their religious beliefs, and this is why they're motivated to do X and Y and Z. But I think for people who are not Baptists or even not necessarily religious, I love the idea of something bad was happening, and so I went and did X. I didn't just sit on my couch and whine and complain about it. And one of the things I think probably why I became a reporter was for that. I like to go and do something. And what I can do live shots and say, can you believe this? Look at this story. One little girl in Pearlington I did a story on. She was sleeping in her FEMA trailer on the cabinet shelf. She was just the right size that they had cabinets over the sink. And her mom put her bed in the cabinet. They took the doors off. You know, you're like, no, seriously, really?
Wow.
So I was like, this is going to be our location for a life. This is a 5-year-old girl who is sleeping in a cabinet. That's insanity. That's what I can do, you know? And I'll tell you one last story if you'll indulge me. You know, my mom, who was a public school teacher for many years, for a little while taught in my public school. And when I was in college, she said I could borrow her car, which was a very fancy Chevette, if I would pick her up from school. And so at the end of the school day, I picked her up. And we're walking through the hall, and I went to an all-white school in Long Island. And there was this black kid in the hallways who clearly did not belong, because the only black people in the school were me and my siblings. And I remember the teachers, the administrators, the principal, the assistant principal, and one of the deans were standing there with this kid who was really just looking very nervous. And I remember my mom, who's like 5'2", black lady, afro, stopped. And the principal said, "We have it handled, Mrs. O'Brien, don't worry. You can go, you can carry on." She said, "No, that's okay. I'm just gonna wait." And I'm like, "Come on, Mom, let's go." She's like, no, we're just gonna wait." And she stood sort of between you and me and just was watching what these three guys were gonna do with this 12-year-old black kid in a school where he clearly did not belong. And the power dynamic got very weird. It got very uncomfortable. And so they said to my mom again, "Mrs. O'Brien, don't you worry, carry on, we've got it handled." And she's like, no, I don't think so. And these guys are her bosses, right? So she's a teacher. They're people who employ her. And I remember feeling this power shift. I was probably 19. This little kid looking back and forth finally looks at my mom and realizes, like, oh, she's here for me in some capacity. But my mom's whole thing was, I'm going to be a witness to this. Whatever happens. You know, again, I have no dog in the fight, but what I will do is I will sit here and I will watch whatever's going to go down. And it may be nothing or it may be something, but I'm going to stand here. So everyone got really anxious and uncomfortable, and finally the principal said to the kid, "Listen, you are not allowed to run in the hallways here, young man." And the kid was, sent on his way. And I remember thinking, like, wow, like that's real power, because the shift was palpable. Just this, by just standing there and saying, like, I'm not going to move, and I'm going to be a truthful witness for the kid and for you guys also. I have no, are my bosses, and this kid is not related to me, but my job is just to tell what happens. It changed a lot. And when I told my mom that story 35 years later, she said, "Oh, I didn't even realize 25 years later, I don't even realize you remembered that." But that was kind of what her whole ethos was about, to bear witness to something very fairly. No agenda, just to say, my job is to watch and tell everybody what's going on.
Edit for me what you've learned or gathered from all of the pieces that you've done on race in America.
Oh, God. We're not in post-racial America would be the first lesson. I'm not sure I know what that means. It would be the second lesson. People are really angry about race in this country. And there is a real desperate need for a conversation about it, but no one really wants to have it. And some of that is correlated to a bad economy, because I think if we were in more flush times, people wouldn't feel like they wanted to sort of, to just hunker down and hold on to what they have. So there's a real sense, I think, of fear and anger and hostility on all sides when it comes to race in this country. And I find that very disappointing. But I think that the optimists would say that means there's real room for improvement. And I think people really do want to have conversations about it. I think people really want to understand. I mean, I've had many friends say, "Why isn't President Obama half white and half black? Why is he not? If he's half black, why isn't he as white as he is black?" And for black people, that's like a crazy question. That's like a crazy question. But for white people, that's kind of like, no, seriously. I don't even want to ask this out loud, but I know you might actually answer this for me. Why are we calling him black when he's really biracial, or he's as much white as black? Like, that's a fair question. But most black people would go crazy. I remember my little boys, I had about to be 6-year-old twins, when they were probably 2.5. They used to say to people, "What's your color? What's your color?" And they'd say to white people, would say, "Oh, I'm sorry, what do you mean?" Say to black people, would be very angry, like, "Excuse me, what?" They meant, "What's your favorite color?" But what's your color, right? Means all, like, there's a conversation, and to see people. I remember then Jackson said that to Kim, our girlfriend who's black, our mutual friend, and she's like, excuse me. I'm like, is it yellow or is it red or is it purple? What's your favorite color? But it used, I mean, the reactions among people, the difference between light-skinned people, dark-skinned people, and not just black and white people, between people who were Bangladeshi, people who were Asian. It was so bizarre, but it was a real indication of, we don't have a lot of these conversations, but we're ready to be on our guard against something, even when it's coming from a 3-year-old. You know, people trying to understand, well, what are you really asking? I think a lot of people would appreciate a conversation about race.
So if I'm playing a little bit of the Soledad role,
go for it.
Wouldn't that bring us back to NOLA.com?
Yeah, but you know, I guess what I find odd about NOLA.com is it immediately goes angry. There's a lot of anger there. I mean, I don't know how many of you are on NOLA, but like the most random thing suddenly devolves into this real, you know, well, I bet da-da-da-da-da-da-da, and fill in the blank, whatever. Black people, white people, there's just this anger. And you're like, how'd you get there? Well, it reminds me of like fights you have with your girlfriend or a spouse, and all of a sudden they're like, well, you never took out the garbage. You're like, what were we even talking about that? How do we get to that conversation?
Well, this is a course where one of the fundamental ways we go about assessing how well our students are doing is by blogging. And clearly you saw me add kind of a carrot of some social media. I'd be very interested to get your kind of perspective.
On blogging and social media?
On the record. And what do you think? I mean, you know.
Oh, now you say on the record.
In the long run, because I think this is
By
important.
the way, everything else was off the record.
Everything was off the record.
No, I'm kidding.
But in the long run, I think that, you know, 5 years from now, we'll be able to go back to whatever you're going to say about these 3 things, blogging, and 2 things, social media.
Well, you know, I did the first daily show on technology on MSNBC. It was called The Site. I was the anchor. And it was hilarious because I remember when they asked me to do that show, I remember thinking, technology, will we even be able to fill up an hour? 6 nights a week? And we did. It was amazing. And we did, you know, this is HTML. This is how you build your own web page. You know, it was just crazy. We had 56.6 modems, you know, on a lot of our machines. But, you know, I guess I welcome social media from the perspective as someone who's encouraged by CNN to be very invested in and spend a lot of time in social media. It's hard because, first of all, you don't really want to, if I'm covering a story, like if I'm going to go do an interview with you, I really don't want to tip everybody off that I'm interviewing you today for a documentary that's going to air in 6 months. That's a bad idea. So often the stuff that I would find interesting to tweet about is just, you can't really do, or even blog about. And for me, I think that some bloggers are very, very good. Others just sort of blog off the top of their heads. When I blog, I'm expected to have facts correct. So, for example, I did a blog about an interview I'd done with Colin Powell. Well, guess what? I actually need his actual quotes, right? So I need the tape of the interview we just did. I can't just sort of make up roughly what Colin Powell has just said, where other people can make up roughly what but you know, our standards are, I cannot. So that then becomes, okay, now I'm actually writing an article, and now I need to transcribe those tapes. It's not just I sit down and blog about, you know, my day, which I'm also happy to do, but that's not really what they expect from me at CNN. They expect a news blog, which means fact-checking and accuracy, all those things that we have a team of people around. So I've actually found it, just on a personal level, a little bit challenging. But then I love it when it's breaking news because I did so much blogging and tweeting around Haiti when we had an earthquake and we were all running for our lives out of our rooms. You know, I said to my husband finally, like, you know, you could just follow me on Twitter, right, and see if I'm alive still. Just throwing it out there. Because we had an earthquake this morning. You know, on the other hand, there's no question it's the way of the world, and I don't believe in when reporters, especially older reporters, say, you know, this is ridiculous, I won't do it. That's crazy. That's craziness. You know, that's sort of like saying, you know, this whole, and there are reporters like that when I started working in TV news. You know, why do we have to go live all the time? What's that? I think it's perfectly fine to come back to the office and sit down and write a thoughtful story and put it together. And, you know, you're right. But that's not the way it works anymore. And now the skill set you need is a skill set of you land and you go live and you do interviews on the fly live and you keep a lot of stuff in your head so that you can continue to do a show live. I've anchored many a show live, 11 hours live. But that was a very big change from when I started. And I think that social media is the exact same way. It's how people are connected. Stuff like Facebook for me is what I resent is the marketing aspect of it. I think a lot of times it's a marketing thing, and that I don't really want to be marketed to. And I don't like to market to people. I mean, I like to tell them when something happens, but I don't really want to market to people.
Well, considering that this is the inaugural session of question and answers from our students, we do one thing before I open up for them to ask you some questions, and we do a bit of a word association.
Oh no.
Okay.
Well, this is better than, who was it who made me identify songs? I'm so bad at that.
No, you're gonna do awesome at this. Huh?
Okay, I'm ready.
Are you ready?
Yes.
So I say the word, and you say the first thing that comes
Got
to
it.
your mind. All right, and then I'll ask you some questions.
Got it.
All right, you
Ready.
just.
I'm ready.
Okay, you good?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Republicans.
That's a good question. What's the first thing that comes to my mind? Michael Steele.
Democrats.
Governor Kane.
Bill O'Reilly.
8 p.m. killing us.
Joan Rivers.
Plastic surgery.
Hugh Hefner.
Old.
Conan O'Brien.
My brother.
Jay Leno.
Big chin.
Oprah.
Rich.
Anderson Cooper.
Handsome.
Tiger Woods.
In trouble.
What is your favorite word?
My favorite word? I'm trying to embrace the word no because that would save me a lot of angst. My favorite word? That's a really good question. I'll have to come back to you on that.
Okay. What is your least favorite word?
My least favorite word is honestly, because invariably, people who start the sentence with honestly are about to lie to you. No, honestly, da-da-da-da. They're teeing up a lie.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Creatively, really great characters. When you meet a person and you think, oh, they should be on TV, they're brilliant, they're interesting, they pop. And I think, how do I do a documentary around that person? Spiritually, I'm working on that still. Talking to all these Baptists has raised a lot of questions for me. And emotionally, I guess it would have to be my kids. Probably can tap into every emotional button. I remember once my daughter has a little playmate who's not very nice. And this child always suggests, let's play a game where we torture your sister. Let's play a game where we hide from your sister. Let's play a game where we pick on your sister, And at one point my daughter said, parroting me, no, in this family, we all have to play together nicely. And I was like, hallelujah, Jesus. Finally, it only took 6,798 times of repeating that same thing over and over again before this child learned. Like, no, you cannot torture your sister. So I think of my kids when they say, yes, please, or thank you, and it wasn't prompted. You're like, oh, it's worth it. So they probably more than anybody can push my emotional buttons.
Okay. What turns you off?
I think arrogance.
What is your favorite curse word?
Oh gosh, I can't. Are you rolling on this? I can't say that.
Yes, you can.
My favorite. Well, I used to say when I would drive and someone would cut me off, "Goddamn fuck shit." And at which point one day my daughter said, one day I said, "Oh shit." My daughter said, "No, mommy, it's goddamn fuck shit." And I was like, "Oh, no, it's not. Pumpkin, no, you misunderstood me. What I said was, you have it wrong." So I stopped.
What sound or noise do you love?
What sound or noise do I love? I don't know. I don't think of my, I never think of my, what sound I used to love? When I started anchoring for the Today Show, and they would do, This Is Today on NBC. Dun, dun, dun. And I remember when I heard that, it felt like I had arrived. Because as a kid, I grew up in an NBC family. And now I was the one who's going to say, This is Today on NBC. It was just, that sound was really, but that's not the case anymore, but that was something that I really remember thinking that I associated something in my life to a sound.
What sound or noise do you hate?
You know, I hate people screaming at people. I'm not a big yeller. I don't like people yelling at each other.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I would have been a great hairdresser, honestly. I don't know, I'd probably be a good lawyer. I'd like to argue, but, you know, facts with people.
What profession would you not like to do?
My husband's an investment banker, and I think that that would be a really miserable job. He seems to like it a lot, but I just don't think that that would be something that I'd want to do.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
I think heaven does exist, and I think it would be great if God said, "Oh, we've been expecting you."
Okay. 2 more words. New Orleans.
Fun.
Irvin Mayfield.
Wearing a suit today. What's that about? He's never in a jacket. This feels like, oh, right, these are your students, right.
Don't expose me.
I'll try not to.
Do you have a favorite word yet?
Do I have I guess I'm looking for a word. No, I'm just going to have to come back to you on that.
Okay.
It's funny because there have been words
You can,
where we thought,
you can
that's a
tweet it
brilliant
to
word.
us.
I will tweet it to you.
All right, let's open it up for some class discussion. Yes, ma'am.
How did you get into journalism and work up to the point you're at now?
I was a failed medical student. I went to, I took organic chemistry with my sister Estella, who is now an eye surgeon. And we were taking organic chemistry, and a lot of organic chemistry, for anybody who's slogged through it, is just memorization, right? The molecule, H2O, is, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so I realized my sister is the opposite of me completely. So she loves to roll in late. I had my 4-color pen, and I'd always be early, and I loved to have memorized everything I needed to memorize. And she would sleep in late, and she would like dash for the car. She's totally disorganized, but she has the mind of a scientist. And one day she said to me, "Why are you memorizing all this crap?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, you know, y equals mx b is clearly a line because it's the xy axis, and b is the variable in space. I mean, what else could it be?" And I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about. I really, literally realized, like, I could memorize a lot and I could spew it back, and that's sort of how I was a good student, but I really didn't necessarily understand what I was talking about. And so I quit school and left college and started working at a TV station. And I loved it, and my job was I fetched coffee and ran scripts for people. But I just felt like I was part of the team, and I had a real role in the process. It just seemed so, you know, that I was going to work in television news no matter what. And then my biggest problem was I was successful. I started working in Boston, you know, coffee fetcher, production assistant, line producer, worked my way up, and eventually, you know, I postponed having kids because I knew that that would really put a sort of a crimp in being able to accept any assignment. So to get where I got today was really a matter of saying yes to every assignment. So people literally would pick me because I was not very good, but I was very enthusiastic. So they knew that they could pick the reporter who was really, really good and talented, but who would whine and bitch about being sent to go cover the meth lab exploding, blah, 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 in downtown San Francisco, or they could pick me, who would do a average job, but I'd be like, "Oh, thank you for sending me. Of course I will. Would you like me to do a short version and a long version? Can I wrap it live? Do you want me at 6 o'clock? I was just enthusiastic, and I always try to get back to that because I think you get these huge points for bringing joy and enthusiasm. There's a young woman who I've been working with, a student at UNO actually, and her family sort of fell on some hard times. And yet when you talk to her, she's the happiest, nicest, you know, you would never know. They lost everything in Katrina. It's a classic Katrina story. You know, but I love this kid, and we gave her a scholarship this year, because there's no woe is me ever. And you know what, she really rightfully could sit down and be like, "I'm 21, and my life has been screwed up by something that was not my fault." She never does. She never does. She's always, "Well, you know, I just feel really lucky that you're having me as an intern. I'm just so happy to be here, and I'm so grateful," genuinely. And I think, wow, I love this kid because she's just a nice, happy person who feels very optimistic about her future. And I think that there was a lot of that people, I like to work for people. I like to learn. I love to be sent on stories. it got harder as I got older, where I had a life, I had kids, and I had to say no, and that's, you know, sort of where I am now, is kind of figuring out how do you balance that, you know, because if you say yes all the time and you go, you know, then you mess up the other side of your life. But that's sort of what I've aimed for, to be the person who everybody wants to work with, because, you know, she's agreeable, she does a good job, she works really hard, and she's just, you know, easy to get along with. You'll never have a hard time with her.
Yes.
Well, besides being like Black and Hispanic, you're also a woman and a mom. I'm sure you like.
And a wife. My poor husband went to one of my speeches once. He's like, "You know, your speeches make it sound like you're a single mother." Right? I'm like, "Oh yes, darling, but I love you."
I mean, there seem to be like different roles, you know, that moms and like the wide variety of moms that they have to fulfill. And I was wondering if you were ever interested in maybe like doing like a piece on women or moms.
We were trying to do a documentary on women in, you know, we do this in America, so all of our working titles are Women in America or Gay in America, and then we come up with a title that fits the actual story. I would love to do Women in America, but you end up doing bad documentaries when you pick when you pick sort of a thing and not a person, right? So you could do Women in America and pick Mary Jane Doe has 3 kids and just enlisted. Now, her dilemma is going to be a dilemma of the modern working mom with a twist. She's in the military. But if she's a great character and there's something happening, that's a good story. But if you go in to do, I'm going to interview 12 moms and talk to or 12 women and do that, it's going to be a survey. It's going to be kind of boring. So you need to find, so now we sort of have we have an Education in America working title. So what's that story look like? What's the school? What's the issue? But if you just do an issue, you're bored. So you've got to find your character. So I think if I found a good female character whose story I wanted to tell, then I would have oh my God, Mary Jane, she's my Woman in America. And that's why our last documentary, which was called Gary and Tony Have a Baby, Gay in America, was the first time that we started doing, you know, really honed down the story of these 2 guys. They're not everybody's story. They're, you know, Gary and Tony, and they have a baby. That's all the story is. But it's a look at one aspect of being gay in America.
Next question.
Yeah.
As you find, your job is to be a witness and to report what you see. Also, whenever in your interview you said it's difficult sometimes just to be that witness, as proved by your foundation, to reach out to that girl, not little, and provide daycare service. Your job, as proved by your many awards, seemed to specialize in the disaster, the Katrina, Haiti, and all that stuff. Is it more difficult? Do you find yourself cursed or lucky to be in that position where you have to just be a witness in a situation like that, where you're not able to interact with that human aspect of you, that it's just, I want to reach out and help these people?
That's a really good question, and I don't know the answer to it. I guess it has to be, I feel lucky because, for example, when the Haiti broke, I was sitting around trying to figure out how to get in. Anderson took my ride with Wycliffe, so it wasn't going to be that. And at some point, my daughter, who's 9, said, "Oh, God, Daddy, somebody better send Mommy to Haiti or she's going to lose her mind." Like, literally. You know, just because you lose your mind, you sit there and think, I know I could tell this story well. I know exactly how I would frame this. I know I could do a good job. I know I could do this for every show. And because I'm in this unit that sort of floats around, we don't, you know, I don't have a show that's sending me. So I got to figure out how to get in. I guess I feel lucky because I feel like that's ultimately what I'm there to do. If I can get out there and tell, you know, a story, then I've sort of served both the journalistic purpose and personally for me, you know, what I'm trying to do and help people in a certain way. I would never help somebody that would compromise them in my story. So whenever I help anybody, for example, Naya, this young woman from Black in America, documentary aired, and I knew we were never going to revisit her again. She's done. So once she gets a scholarship, that child is not allowed to be part of any story I ever do. And she doesn't need to be. So, you know, so I really make sure that I'm not compromising. I try to make sure that we're not compromising sort of the storytelling. You know, it's funny too because sometimes you think people need things and they really need kind of the issue understood. You know, like really in South Africa, people need, in the slums that I go to, they need everything. But really what they need is for people to give a shit about their story more than a mattress, which somebody else can provide.
Next question. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that the issue in Haiti is now more in the forefront? I ask that because my mom was a missionary in Haiti starting in like 1988 to about 2000. And it was just as bad then. I mean, she would write a weekly newsletter and she'd say, at home, our kids scream for ice cream. You know, I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. Here they just want rice and beans. And they would send home a 50-pound sack of rice and a 50-pound sack of beans once a month. And that would literally be all the food the family would have for a month. So it hasn't gotten any better. Do you think that this attention might help that?
I do think it will. I just sort of think attention, and it's back to my sort of theory of lay it out there for good and bad. I do think attention will help. Because I actually was so encouraged by the giving to Haiti, because I felt like most people don't go to Haiti. They don't really go to Haiti for vacation. They don't, you know, so I felt that people were really giving because they knew Haiti's history and they understood the plight of the people, and they felt very compassionately toward the circumstances and people's circumstances there. So I do. I think people are watching what's happening. Part of the problem in giving is you feel very helpless. It's interesting though, one of the missionaries that we did a story on, one of the sort of pieces of drama we caught in this documentary was someone shows up with a baby. And she's like, nope, we limit this orphanage is limited to 58 people. The answer is no, you cannot come in. The woman said, well, here, just take my baby. And you know, you see this whole tug of war, but her whole thing is how my job is to do what I do well. You know, and I do it well for 58 people. But at 60 people, I start messing it up for everybody. You know, and it was very interesting to kind of watch that whole idea of limit your focus, do that well, and yet people were writing into me, oh my God, how could she not take a baby? And the girl, you know, how desperate must you be to just say, well, then just take my newborn baby. You know, I think it is, I think the attention is going to help. I think it's a long, if New Orleans is a 10-year rebuild, then Haiti is a 30-year rebuild. But, you know, the immediate signs are not encouraging because nothing's happening there right now. But I think that these things take time to, and I think people who have a voice are sort of positioned to do things. Like President Clinton's a good one, and Sean Penn, you know, people who can sort of bring attention to an issue. So I think that those are hopeful signs, and they weren't there 10 years ago.
Next question? Yes, ma'am.
With globalization and kind of the world getting smaller, the more educated we become about cultures, you would think would lead to more tolerance. However, it creates that other that everyone is afraid of cultures that they don't understand, and so now you have very specific conflicts and reasons why people have conflict with, you know, hate each other. So I was just wondering what you think how much responsibility should and has the media kind of taken in by providing us with so much information, conflict also arising from that, just by the information that we're given, and then also how big of a role should the media then play with lasting change?
You know, again, I think our role is to cover it. I think anything that's unfolding, your job and your responsibility is to show all sides fairly. You can go to a rally, and I can pick out 3 nutty people, any rally. The Girl Scouts of America can have a rally, right? I can find you 3 crazy people who you would, you know, your job is to say, what is the real story happening here? What is the actual story? Spend time and reflect accurately what's going on, whatever the rally, the thing you're watching is. And so I think that that's our job, and I think that that's really how you get tolerance and understanding. The way you get tolerance and understanding is by people going out of their shell and meeting other people. Because I remember when I met a guy once, and he said to me, so, O'Brien, you must be Irish. And I said, yeah, well, you know, I'm black and Irish. He goes, oh, black Irish. You know, black Irish is like the dark hair. I'm like, yeah, kind of. He's like, because you know I don't like black people. But black Irish, I like black Irish. Okay, we'll start from there. You know, just like, here's, and he was my car driver for a long time, for years. And then when he met my mother, he's like, oh my God, you're black! It just, I think that changed his sense of like, oh, because I thought X about people. Or I thought what? I mean, you hear it all the time, certainly in this Muslim debate. You know, and then someone meets somebody who's Muslim, or they say, You know, Hoda Kotb on NBC News is Muslim. You know, she's Muslim. Oh, huh, that kind of changes for people who don't really know any Muslims. That sort of changes your perspective on who's Muslim. You could just run through a list of people who are a Muslim and have an idea of like, oh, well then all the things I'm thinking about somebody, that person doesn't quite fit, whatever it is. White people too, you know, I know plenty of black people who've never gone to school with white people until college or until they go into the workplace. You know, they have all these ideas, oh, well, you know, white people do this, white people do that, you know, until suddenly that white person invites them over to a barbecue, and they're like, oh, huh, well, all these things cannot be true. So I think our job is in the storytelling to be fair and accurate. And in terms of, you know, in all levels, the job is not to do anything other, you know, not to have an agenda in it at all, just to say, this is the story. And then let me get in there to try to explain. A mother is dropping off her kid at an orphanage. Is that because Haitian mothers are terrible people and they hate their children? Or is it because, imagine the level of desperation you must be in, where giving up your child and handing them over to a complete stranger seems like a very viable option? You know, which is it? That's my job, right? To explain that. Because it would be very easy to have the other version seem like it's the right answer. So it's telling the story fairly and then providing some context to it. But I don't think we have any other, and we shouldn't have any other agenda than that.
Let's go to 2 last questions. So let's make them good. Anyone? Yes.
Was there ever like a story that was just too tough to like cover?
No, there's never been one that's been, you know, because a good story is a complicated story. Really, you know, the best kinds of stories are the ones where no matter where you feel, how you feel about the story, you're kind of like, wow, the serial killer who's really an engaging guy and claims he didn't do it. Or the, you know, the really lovely nun who spent years and years helping people, and then you realize that, you know, she also robbed people from her last career, you know, before she became a nun and found God. And you're like, oh, huh. So is she inherently, you know, it's a classic, you know, is man inherently good or inherently evil? And, you know, to me, the gray areas are really interesting. A story that's, you know, black and white is not that compelling. It's the nuance that kind of makes a good, certainly a good documentary. So I've never found a story that I've been covering that's too hard. Even the ones where, I remember covering in the tsunami, I interviewed a guy who, I met him in the elevator of my hotel. His hand was bandaged up, and his wife's foot was bandaged up, and I asked them, and they showed me a picture of their son who was missing. And we interviewed him on the show, and I said, so what happened? And he said, well, you know, we were in this 2-story complex, and a wave came through, and I was holding my son, and the water was rushing so fast, like that we were floating over the tops of the palm trees. That's how high up it was. Like we kept smacking into palm trees. And he said, you know, and the little boy was sort of slathered in sunscreen, and he wanted to get a better grip on him. So he sort of shifted his grip, and the kid popped out, floated away. And he kept saying, but he's got water wings. And I'm thinking, because of the water wings, I think he's probably alive. I think he's alive. And I'm thinking, no, he's not. Kid's been missing for a week. He's not alive. You know, and that was a really, not so much just the kid is missing and probably dead, but I mean, imagine the guilt of a father, you know? And he said it. I shifted my grip. I wanted to get a better hold on him, so I moved my arm, and he slid out. Like, that to me is so much harder to think about, the guilt of a parent. You know, he lost his child. He let him go. How do you live beyond that? I don't know. Yeah.
You, then you.
So how much does your story not make it to the news, if that happens? Has that ever happened? Like have you covered a story and they just edit like 50% of it?
No, now, yes, when I started, sure. You know, you were at the mercy of whatever. But as I sort of went up the ladder, I have a lot of say in what's going to air. Stories now, for me, don't make it when, you know, you have a character and they're just boring. Or you have a story and you think it's going to be one thing, but it doesn't really happen. You think the drama's going to be the struggle to do X, and it turns out that's not what happens at all. That's really when things, they're just not interesting. you know, nothing happens, they kind of peter out. Very rarely, people I think sometimes have this sense like that the conglomerates behind the news, you know, called you up and pulled the plug on a story. I wish. I remember when I used to work for MSNBC, you know, I wish Microsoft was watching any of the coverage. I was always like, so does Bill Gates watch us at all? You know, so that never happens. And very rarely does someone say, you know, this is too hot to handle. People are dying for that on TV. So never. It really is, oh my God, this person is terrible. They can't even finish a sentence. Jesus. They're awful. No, this can't run. They're too boring. That's when you kill them.
When you were talking about the importance of immediacy in news, you said you would rather know what's going on and as soon as possible and find out the answers to your questions later. You report what you know as soon as possible, and people who want to know more know where to come later. Do you think that...
I don't think I exactly said that quote, but go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm challenging the premise.
Do you think that this instant regurgitation of half information might have a negative effect?
That is framed so negatively, instant regurgitation of half information. How can I answer yes to that? Yes, my instant regurgitation of half information. No, I understand your question. And what I was trying to say, and maybe I didn't say clearly, is I do believe getting on a story to flesh it out immediately is very important. But what I also think is you have to report what you know, and you have to be fair and accurate in your coverage. But obviously there's a bigger context that often shifts and changes and grows as the coverage continues. The story of Haiti was very different from day one as it was a week later, as it is 6 months later. So it's not a matter of, hey, I just get out there and tell whatever I can and don't bother to have any kind of context. A good example would be, I'm on Amtrak. Our train has stopped. I'm getting phone calls. Looks like the whole entire Northeast corridor is down. So we end up, I interview the conductor, what's going on? He tells me it looks like we've lost the power, blah, 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 over across the Susquehanna River, blah, blah, blah. So they set up, it looks like Amtrak trains are stopped. We know of these 5 trains, which are now, and here are shots of people waiting in stations. Soledad's on one of those trains, right? So now my report is going to be squashed into a context of the big picture, which I do not know. I have no idea if the entire Northeast corridor is out or not. I know that someone is telling me, doing our research, is telling me that they're getting official confirmation from someone. So I talk about, here's what the conductor has just said. Here's what the people are doing on this train right now. Did you know last month I was on a train that also stopped? That was a problem because of the heat. Blah, 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 right? So I'm doing my immediate live shot, but very much sticking to, here's what I see in front of me. When we covered orphanages in Haiti, there are 136 kids at this orphanage who try to get out. The bigger context is only 300 kids will be adopted probably at all this year. So what's the reality of these kids getting out, et cetera, et cetera. You know, so I try to tell that story immediately. This is what's happening. The context is a little bit bigger picture. And then even a week later, when all those kids got out, you revisit the story because guess what? The State Department has allowed those kids to leave. What's that going to mean for this influx of Haitians into Miami, et cetera, et cetera. And then, even more importantly, you follow up. Like the baby, we haven't done this story yet, but we've heard about it, you know, who is in detention because the parents who said they were adopting him didn't show up, don't want him. No, that's sort of how you do it. But you don't just, I would never just go on the news and say, I'm on a train that has conked out, and I believe that maybe there's a massive disaster for Amtrak and the Northeast. You know, you have a whole team editorially behind you helping consistently put together the pieces of the puzzle, and then they jump around to reporters, you know, and as you spend the time covering it, you're able to also flesh out the bigger picture.
All right, well.
Half reported. What did you say?
How about we give a round of applause for our first guest, Soledad O'Brien. And all you guys are welcome to come join us tonight as I play at my club. We start at 8 o'clock, 300 Bourbon Street, so come on down and hang out with us if you like. If you haven't been there, I don't think I've seen many of you there before, so it's never bad to show up.
Free drinks on Irvin, no, kidding.
On Soledad. It's never bad to show up and have your professor see your face. The other thing I want to add is that I will be removing one session from the schedule, which will be the week that I do my lecture. That's mandatory attendance by all of you, and the only thing you have to do is show up to the lecture. So we'll let you know well in advance when and where that will be, most likely somewhere on campus. Other than that, everybody's got your assignment. In Soledad, we have a place for you to go in and blog. So you can
Fantastic.
see what they're saying and you can respond. And
I think I got a copy of that.
Stephanie will give you
Great.
offline your, I think we
When
already
you
sent it to
emailed
you.
me, yeah. Great.
So you have it and going, and we're looking forward to seeing what you have to say, and you can continue that discussion with Soledad online on websites. So I will see you guys same time, same place next week. Thank you.